All right, it is time for SIP episode 109. This week's guest is Brady Moran of Moran Manor, who farms and produces wine from a less than 1 acre vineyard in Knights Valley, surrounded by Behringer's esteemed Knights Valley's estate. And also a nice announcement considering the Imagine Dragons and what you wine lovers are helping us do, change the world. Welcome to SIP episode 109. I don't think we'll get in trouble for this. Yes, you will. Hello, everybody, and welcome to SIP episode 109. I just lost everyone. Where'd everyone go? Oh, there we go. Alyssa is in the house twice. Eileen, Elizabeth, good to see you, Liz. Eric, Ivy, Jan, Jeff, and Jane are back in the house. Funny story about Jeff and Jane coming up. Jim B is in the house. Karen, Lori, Peter. Adolfo is in the house because he wants to see what he's getting himself into next week. So a little trial by fire this evening. Adolfo, side note, we don't always have background music, but this is a special episode because the Sipsters again contributed mightily to an amazing cause. So the background music this evening is courtesy of the Imagine Dragons. And my name is Martin Cody, co-founder of Cellar Angels, and we're a direct-to-consumer company of wine specializing exclusively in wines of limited production only from Napa and Sonoma. And tonight's guest certainly fits that bill. But one of the things we did when we started this company in 2010 was we wanted to change the world with wine. And last week was another example of how the Sipsters and Cellar Angels in particular have done just that. We were in, I'm sorry, not last week, 2 Fridays ago, we were in Las Vegas for a charity event for the Tyler Robinson Foundation. And the Tyler Robinson Foundation is the philanthropic arm of the band, the Imagine Dragons. So they befriended Tyler Robinson, a child suffering with cancer, at one of their shows in Utah when they were unsigned and really unknown. And they made it their mission to, at that point in time, to figure out a way to use their platform to help children and families suffering with the costs of cancer treatment. It was a magical, magical evening. There was over 1,000 people in attendance, and we helped raise $3.5 million. And the highlight of the night for Cellar Angels was when I was on stage with host Joel. What's Joel's last name? McHale? Okay, Joel McHale. Some of you may know him from some of the shows on the WB or some other shows. Very funny individual. But he and I are on stage and we auctioned off a live interactive tasting for 40 people where Cellar Angels will fly to the location of the winner and give them a private tasting of five wines. It's a once in a lifetime experience. We never repeat the wines. And this item was purchased by the Imagine Dragons drummer for $30,000. So Dan Platzman is the lucky winner of that. We would have told you all about this last week when we still had amazing momentum and were fresh off that trip, but a little boy named Ian had something to say about that. So we regret that last week we were not able to produce the SIP show. We even had a contingency plan with Jeff and Jane ably filling in as hosts from the road, and they agreed to do it remotely, but then they had axle problems and had to get back up to Chicago. So we had no contingency for the contingency. So we had to take the week off, and we apologize for that. But I think it's important to stress in early September, we had a massively successful event in Denver with the Folds of Honor. We were coming off the heels of this great event with Imagine Dragons and the Tyler Robinson Foundation. You guys are doing amazing work. Whenever you buy wine, we set aside portions of those proceeds to put into a bucket so that we can go do these events. And it makes a world of difference. With that $30,000, they're now going to be able to help about 5 different families with various costs associated with treating childhood cancer. And we're going to send you some videos. It's a pretty amazing event, but what they do is spectacular. So thank you all so much for your contributions and your wine purchases and your love of wine, especially from the limited production producers. Tonight, I want to get into it with a very, very limited production producer. And you may remember Brady from the winery Red Car, but what you may not know is he has his family has a side project, and it's something that people always ask us, how do you find your wineries? And after 12 years of doing this and introducing you to just small, iconic boutique wineries. More often than not, they find us. So it's been great to learn about Brady. And I want to introduce you again to Brady Moran and his family's wine, Moran Manor. So Brady's going to walk down the hallway out of the green room and turn his camera on. There we go.
Hello, hello.
So thank you, Brady, and cheers to you. And thank you for troubling and pushing through some things on your end over the week and appearing on SIP tonight for SIP episode 109.
Yeah, my pleasure. Great to be here. Love chatting wine with you. So it's always a new adventure, a new topic to explore.
So speaking of exploration, many people know the Cellar Angels story, and they know Mission Control and I owned a wine store before we went into the virtual world. And it's fascinating for us to always hear wine consumers with what they believe might be wine facts and what we also probably know to be wine fiction. And tonight we're going to get into it a little bit more, but they know our story, but not many people may know your story. So walk us through a little bit about how you first got into wine and how you ended up where you are in arguably one of the finest wine regions in the world.
Yeah, totally. So I grew up in Northern California, and my first wine job was actually right when I finished high school at a vineyard in the Santa Cruz Mountains. It was actually my younger brother's little league coach managed Cinnabar vineyards in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and he had all these sort of vines in their early form of training, and he hired me and a friend and a couple other people to work on these vines for the summer. And I thought it was great work. And from there, I worked at some harvest through college. And when I finished college, I was like, I know more about wine than most 22-year-olds. I'm going to Napa. And I headquartered at my parents' house in Knights Valley. And I got a job at a tasting room in Calistoga. I ended up working at Cuvée in Napa for 6 years. From there, I went to Clos de Val, sort of one of those iconic old school wineries in Stag's Leap. I worked there for 3 years, and then I went to the Willamette Valley. I actually worked up in Oregon in the Willamette Valley for 5 years before coming down to Sonoma County and being at Red Car for the last 5 years. And that's actually when I started taking over the farming at my parents' place for the vineyard. My first year doing the farming was 2018. And although the vineyard's much older than that, we planted the vines in the late 90s.
Oh, wow.
So being full on 100% involved in Moran Manor, the family project, is a little more recent. I was always sort of involved, but doing the farming and sales and marketing and stuff, that's within just the last few years.
Awesome. I like the fact that you grew up in Northern California, spent some time in, the Santa Cruz Mountains, had a little taste of Willamette, came back, worked your parents, kind of headed at this house behind me and this land behind me. Was there, and you're right, with that background, you did have more wine experience than most 22-year-olds who were still drinking as cheap a beer as they could find in college and that sort of thing. Was there a wine epiphany that you said, wow, this wine rocked my world and I want to do this from an old world standpoint? Or was it just the consistent new world? How did you refine your wine style from what you wanted to enjoy and what you wanted to produce?
Yeah, great question. And I would say that's always evolved, through my journey through the wine world. I think my tastes and preferences and everything has always evolved over time. But I would say like my high interest in our vineyard and doing the farming, really came from like, a part of me was, gardening and growing trying to grow and propagate my own grapevines myself.
Right.
And then, reading on natural farming, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is really maybe where part of my passion lies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I looked at this beautiful vineyard that already existed and was like, well, how can we treat it the best possible way we can? How can we get the most out of this and have it be the most productive for us and also best for the land?
Right.
And that really sort of all came together.
Super cool. And you're right, it is actually always evolving. And it's interesting because the taste can change, weekly, monthly, yearly, certainly based upon season, what you're eating, who you're with. So I don't know that you're ever there. It's always kind of a journey, if you will, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I 100% agree with that.
Hello, Bridget. Hello, Doug. Hello, Jadine. Who else? Julie. Hello. Haven't seen you in ages, and that's because we've been off. Hello, Kay. Nancy. Scotland is in the house. Is Scotland? Do we have a twofer next week or a week after? I think we've got a Scotland coming up, as a matter of fact. For those of you joining us, my name is Martin Cody, co-founder of Cellar Angels. With me tonight is Brady Moran from Moran Manor. Pretty impeccable wine career already at a young age. Some of you are drinking what I'm drinking, which is the Knights Valley Moran Manor Merlot for 2018. And the new folks who are rookie sipsters might be asking themselves, how did these people get the wine in advance? And the trick is you have to go to the Cellar Angels website, and it will allow you to hit the shop, wine, and there you will see a sip kit. So the sip kit will have 5 wines in it, and it will be the next 5 wines for the next 5 Fridays in a row. So you just go to the website, you can order this sip kit, it gets delivered, and then you can sit back like we're doing this evening, laugh, learn, engage, be entertained, but most importantly, be educated. Tonight's topic is wine myths. And we are going to tap into Brady's knowledge from both the tasting room, the production side of the house, the winemaking side of the house, and learn. And by the way, people can share some myths in the chat if they would like. But Brady, the first one I want to talk about is lunar cycle. So coming from a medical background in the sales arena and being married to a nurse and having a sister that is a nurse, there is something with lunar cycle with baby deliveries, with emergency department visits, and there seems to be a biodynamic influence in wine production. Do you have any thoughts on the validity of biodynamic and lunar cycle with quality of wine production?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and this is a topic that I think will be explored for centuries to come. But yes, I mean, on the one hand, right, doing farming by the lunar calendar, which is a big part of biodynamics. Farming by the lunar calendar has a long history of having positive effects on grapes and how they grow. On the other hand, I know from practical experience, things don't always line up with the human schedule,
Right.
exactly the right way. And I know, like, for example, I think of, on the biodynamic calendar, there's like blackout days. There's days you're not allowed to do anything. No farming at all, right? Well, if it's 110 degrees out there, we probably want to water. We probably want to turn on the irrigation. So,
right.
But, I would say that, overall, there's definitely positive impacts to farming by the moon. And people take it a step further. They go to the point where they're like, oh, it must be a fruit day because the wine is tasting really fruity today, right? And it's based on these different days in the lunar cycle. It's all fascinating. How much can we prove? I mean, is always the big question.
Right. And how much factually can you extrapolate out of those things is always, like you said, proving with some scientific data and testing. I tend to fall into the camp that I do believe there's some validity in it with regards to the wine production vineyard items. I've also heard people basing the quality of the wine on the lunar cycle as well. That one I'm still a little foggy on. And I'd be curious if folks in the audience have some thoughts on lunar cycle, biodynamic impacting the taste of the wine, not necessarily the production of the wine in the bottle. I also would be remiss if I didn't talk about the 2 pop quizzes that we've missed providing highlights on. And I don't know, Brent, if Brent is not on, I would like to send a challenge out, because other than Mike P, and we can't give last names, Brady, because apparently it's not a best practice in the virtual world. The Sauvignon Blanc grapes that lack sun exposure or are harvested early have odor of, and the answer was A, green pepper. And that was 2 weeks ago. Mike P, I know Mike won that one. We deposited, I think, a couple hundred points in his loyalty account. This week, Brent H, who I think has won 3 of the last 4 weeks, and we're not doing anything. It's he has, I think, some Southwest Airlines notification on our poll questions that come out on Monday, and his computer must ding or something because his answers come within a minute. Merlot is the most planted variety in Bordeaux. True or false? Brady, you want to fathom a guess?
I'm gonna go true.
With the utmost confidence exuding from your voice, you are correct.
Yes.
It is true. Brent H got that one correct as well. So the next thing I want to talk about with regards to myths is legs, the teardrops,
Oh yeah.
the racing of the drop down the side of the glass.
Yeah.
So is that a sign of quality?
I would say it's not like you can see nothing from the legs, right? But you could put, I mean, part of it is indicative of how good your glass is, right? The quality of your glass.
Bingo. Yep.
And
Very
you
tough to
could
see them in
also,
a red solo cup.
if you have a really good glass, you could put tequila in it. It's going to have some really good legs as you go. So, I would say if you're used to seeing wine in the same glass over and over again, and you're tasting multiple different wines, yes, you could see a difference in like how the wine hugs the side of the glass as it comes down, right? But if you're moving from glass to glass with no consistency, I don't think the legs can really tell you a whole lot of anything.
Coming up, this is also a poll question. Another prominent wine blogger, this is from Doug, says that legs are a sign of alcohol content, and that is actually true. And there's a couple of theories of thought on the legs being related to quality. And it has to do kind of what you mentioned earlier, Brady, with regards to the Judgment of Paris and some of the old world wines. Their legs were consistently faster than the American wines, and it did have to do with alcohol content. From a chemical standpoint, and I wish Hans was here because he's the only engineer I know, it is a surface retention thing. And so you've got the alcohol in the droplet of wine and water, and the ratio of those two with the surface resistance on the glass, which is exactly to your comment, the quality of your glass you have makes a huge difference in both the visibility and speed of those legs. So it's not necessarily a sign of quality, but it definitely is a sign of alcohol. And then you can probably draw some inferences with the speed that where is this wine coming from a region perspective, old world, new world type of thing. But I haven't ever heard it linked to quality. So people that say, oh, it has really good legs, that must mean it's a good wine. No, that's a myth.
I wonder what the speed difference is between a wine that's 12% alcohol and 14% alcohol as you see it. I wonder if it's visible, that you can actually see the difference in rate.
I sense a video test coming up. So there's going to be a lab around, I'm sure. I promise you, UC Davis or some of those schools have done that sort of stuff, because with surface tension and consistent glasses, I think that would be an interesting test, from a 12% to a 14 to some of those very unctuous Zinfandels that just go screaming down the glass. Actually, I can't remember, someone chime in. Is it speed? Is it the slower it goes, the more alcohol, or the faster it goes? I think it's slower. So if you look in the glass and see legs, then you have, oh, and it might be a poll question coming up. If you want me to launch it, is what mission control. Okay, stop yelling at me. I hear you. All right, we'll launch that first poll question. You should all be able to get this correct. Slow legs indicate high alcohol, high sugar content, older vintage, or crystal glass. Brady, I don't know if you can vote. Oh, he can now. We upgraded.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, it also doesn't have anything to do with sugar, although you could draw the distinction between sugar and alcohol, and that has a little bit of an influence there. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. 5 people were not paying attention. So the high alcohol crowd is correct. That is, I like the way we describe our angels. It's a high alcohol crowd. That is good job for 13 people. No rust there. The next one I want to address from a myth standpoint is decanting. So does decanting make every wine better?
You know, in my experience, no. And it's really, been based on, the wine itself. I haven't found necessarily any hard and fast rule, but, if you think about it, when you're decanting a wine, you're allowing a ton of oxygen to enter the wine right away, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so just by nature, that's going to open up the fruit and, soften the tannins. It's just going to make a wine much more aromatically approachable. But think of a wine that's already sort of in a delicate spot. Putting it in a decanter can possibly, introduce too much oxygen, in a sense, like beat the wine up a little bit.
What do you mean by delicate spot?
Like say a wine has already, maybe it's not decades old, but it's already been cellared. It's already had a spot to, say naturally reach a point where it's drinking really well.
Mm-hmm.
That may be a wine where pulling the cork and just letting it breathe for a minute is enough.
Right.
Being really aggressive with a wine and dumping it in a decanter, it's certainly going to introduce a lot of oxygen. But is that going to be, the way you're going to really enjoy the wine? Is that going to allow the wine to open up over time? It's sort of, it's having a major input on the process, on the flavor profile. You're doing a lot to it basically when you're decanting it.
No, and I think from that delicate perspective, most wines, I haven't seen a wine yet that didn't have a range for optimal enjoyment. Usually 5 to 7 years. And sometimes it'll say that we'll drink great in 20 to 30 years. So it'll have a 10-year range. And when it's at let's say it says we'll drink now through 2032. If it's 2031, it might be in that delicate phase where it could be past its prime, so to speak. And like you said, if you're throwing it into a decanter and then swishing the decanter all around, you could be really agitating that wine and pushing it well past its prime.
Yeah, I use this example. It wasn't that long ago. We opened a bottle of like 2008. And initially we opened it and we're like, oh my gosh, this wine's phenomenal. This is drinking great. It doesn't taste old at all. And the wine fell apart within a couple hours, right? We went back to the wine an hour and a half later and it was all the fruit was gone. I mean, this isn't a wine we decanted even, right?
Right.
But that's a wine where if we had put it right in the decanter, I think everything would have dissolved, right? We would have sort of lost all color, all flavor, all aromatics, would have sort of blown off, right?
And what causes that wine to just fall off that quickly?
I don't, that's a good question. There's a lot, there's a few components of how wines age really well, acidity, tannins, alcohol, obviously. And it's a mystery of when those aren't quite in balance, when a wine sort of disintegrates like that. I think that's one of the cool things about wine is there's still a lot of mystery around, what bottle is going to hold up and what isn't. And we might have even opened another bottle of the exact same wine and it may have held up a little longer.
Yeah, and I think you're right. That's the fascinating aspect of one of 100 fascinating aspects of wine, because it is an ever evolving product. I mean, it's going to change. The air coming into the cork is going to allow that wine to evolve over time. And could it have benefited from greater tannins to give it a little bit more oomph over a longer period of time? Sure. But that's why you have to buy wine in quantity so you can taste these things over time and see what's happening to the wine as it ages. I want to switch gears now from kind of some of the myths we're going to discuss, but also talk a little bit about Knights Valley. And to do that, I will launch our second poll question. So this one, you have a 50-50 chance. Knights Valley has been farmed for over 4,000 years. True or false? Well, there's some quick answers right away. Then I think there was some, maybe I was too fast there. Brady probably knows the answer to this.
I don't. I'm not sure. We'll find out. And then at the bottom of the hour, we'll allow folks to turn on some cameras. I'm going to give this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The answer is true. Yep. Wow.
The Wapo Indians were farming Knights Valley from way atop and on the other side of Mount St. Helena, all the way down to the coast, where they had actually Ida Clayton Road was a trail that they would take to the coast. And at the coast, they would, get shells, get shellfish, fish, and barter with folks, but they were using grains and things to move over to the waterway and use that as transport 4,000 years ago. Part of that land is, as Brady and I were discussing during the prep, this is one of the areas, Knights Valley, that hasn't changed much in 4,000 years. Where you look at, it hasn't changed much in the last 200 either, which I know locals love, right? Because they don't want to see all of the things that have happened to Healdsburg or Calistoga and stuff like that from an explosion standpoint. But Knights Valley is one of the smaller AVAs. It has some pretty famous growers and wineries there. As a matter of fact, we're going to show you on Google Earth Brady's property. But Brady, why don't you describe a little bit about the parcel behind me and who you're surrounded by?
Yeah. So my parents got the house in 1996, and the total property is almost 11 acres. And it's surrounded on all 4 sides by Beringer Knights Valley. This is Beringer Vineyards, one of their largest vineyard plots here. And so they're farming mostly Cabernet. This is, high-end Beringer fruit. But yeah, they are on all 4 sides of us, farming a lot of grapes out there.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the Beringer Cabernet, Beringer has been farming grapes here since 1877. That's quite a long time. And this is the old Calvin Holmes house, which I know Brady knows.
Yeah.
But this is where you grew up to a degree?
Yeah. I had just, let's see, I was 15 years old when my parents got this place.
And it's interesting. I've driven by Brady's house, not knowing it was Brady's house, about 100 times, because when you're cutting through Sonoma to Napa on the back trail versus going over one of the white knuckle routes over the mountain, you go right by Brady's house. And so it is, we call it one of the prettiest drives in wine country, because when you're coming around and leaving Healdsburg and going around and coming over, it's just beautiful landscape, great topography. It's not all flat. There are plenty of hills, but around each turn is just an idyllic vineyard set. And it is really a pretty house or a pretty area. And I had no idea that this was there. And it's 11 acres. And how many of the acres are planted to vines?
Almost 1 acre.
Almost 1 acre.
Yeah.
Okay. I am going to have Mission Control turn on cameras. While you, Brady, I would love to talk to me about the Merlot.
Yeah. Well, the Merlot has been, I'll start with how we planted the vineyard. And this will sort of tell the story of the Merlot. So when we first moved into the house, my dad made friends with the manager of Beringer Vineyards, who, after one year of being done with some new planting, said, "Hey, we've got some extra vines over here. Do you guys want them?" And my dad's like, "Sure, we'll take them. We'll plant them." And that happened over successive years. So over the course of a few years, we got Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, a little bit of Syrah, and created really what, the idea originally was to have like a field blend.
Yep. I
Um,
was just going to say
but
exactly.
but what happened over time is each year we realized that the Merlot fruit was really driving like the flavor profile when we were doing
Mhm.
our blend. It was really sort of the standout in terms of the, what we enjoyed drinking. Let's put it that way, what we really enjoyed drinking. And so when we actually bottled Merlot on its own for the first time, which I think wasn't until 2011, we realized, we're like, well, maybe this is actually our favorite grape variety from the property. So it's become my personal favorite. I like the way it's more fruit forward than the the Cabernet can be a little restrained. The Merlot is quite generous. It's really giving in its fruit. It ripens sort of right on schedule every year. And so it's really, Knights Valley is in general all about richness. I mean, naturally, we're getting a lot of richness to the fruit. But we see, at least personally, I get a lot of balance in this Merlot. I get a lot of this fruitiness, but I get a lot of the weight, the tannins. It seems to ripen right when I want it to. It handles new French oak really well. And it's just become, my favorite variety there of our three varieties. Merlot has become my personal favorite.
And now I love the field blend aspect of what you had unintended happening. How do you determine now the Merlot vines? And because you now have 4 or 5 different varietals in the vineyard, so you have to really go through very carefully to pick the Merlot for 100% Merlot.
Yeah, so I've had to go through and mark every row because there is a
Okay.
section where it goes every other row is something different. That was actually an interesting planting opportunity too. We originally planted all the grapevine rows with like tractor width, right? A width so a tractor could drive through. But we're a small vineyard, so we eventually interplanted. We planted a row between the rows, and that's how we ended up with probably this 20 row sequence where it goes Merlot, Cab, Merlot, Cab, Merlot, Cab. So we have to mark those really carefully. And on pick days, I have to be really diligent about making sure people are in their right row when we're
Exactly.
picking, because it's really easy to find in a field full of 1,000 grape plants. It's real easy to find yourself in the wrong row real quick. So we have to keep a real close eye on that as we go through.
Are the bins color coordinated? So like all the Merlot goes into yellow bins, Cab goes in red.
They go in separate trucks. So
Oh, good.
this last year, all the Merlot went in a red truck and all the Cabernet went in a gray truck. And that's how we kept it separate.
I would imagine that gets pretty confusing. And what about for you? What are some of the go-to food pairings with the Merlot?
Uh, I mean, Merlot is pretty versatile considering how robust it drinks. But one of my favorite things, and this is going back in time, is right there in Calistoga. Where we are is just a 15-minute drive from Calistoga, and you could get this duck, like in a bag, where you'd boil it in a bag. It'd be like this duck leg with salad, and I always thought the duck with Merlot was always this awesome pairing. You've got sort of this, fatty, foul kind of dish, and I always thought that was a great pairing.
See, and I definitely think that would work. It's funny because we talk about this every now and then on Cellar Angels, and certainly amongst ourselves. Everyone always thinks Cabernet Sauvignon and filet mignon, and it's actually the opposite. It's Merlot and filet mignon. Cabernet is fantastic with strip, prime rib because of that fattiness and the acidity in the cab. Filet is so lean. Merlot just makes it sing. And this
Yeah,
Merlot, I think,
totally.
would be fantastic with that. All right, let me get back to some more myths. Sulfites. Sulfites cause headaches. True or false?
I think there are a few people on this planet for whom sulfites do cause headaches. But generally, this is a good opportunity to tell a funny tasting room story from long ago. So I was working in Calistoga. This is probably 15 years ago in a tasting room that saw lots of bicyclists. And it was one of those Calistoga days where it was like 105 degrees. And these people come in on bikes and they're drinking wine, right? And one of them inevitably gets sick, right? Feels really bad, and gets sick out in front of the tasting room. And they come back the next day and they say, "Do you think it was the sulfites in the wine that made me sick?" And we're like, "Actually, we think it might be the alcohol in the wine that made you sick." But
Yeah, or the 7 glasses you had.
yeah. But sulfite, I'll also go back in time and say, I remember a winemaker telling me this really early in my career, saying, "There's more sulfites in your average trip to a salad bar than there are if you drink an entire bottle of this wine." And that's pretty true. When it comes to high quality wine, you're looking at around 50 parts per million of sulfur,
Correct.
which is sort of untastable and well below a threshold that would cause a reaction for most people. Sulfites are a preservative. They do, even in a low quantity, they will help the wine develop and age over time. They will prevent oxidation. Oxidation is something that will age wine really fast, and they will slow that way down. You just don't need so many that you can taste it. I mean, that's when you can start tasting the sulfur, that's when a wine is ruined, right?
Right.
That's
Exactly.
when you're drinking something not so great.
This was probably one of the top 2 or 3 things we heard when we owned the wine store and continue to hear today, is that sulfites cause headaches. Now, to your point, there is less than 50, there's 50 to 100 parts per million of sulfites in a bottle of wine. There is no such thing as a sulfite-free wine because it's a naturally occurring byproduct in fermentation. There are only 2 ingredients currently legislatively listed on a bottle of wine: contains sulfites and alcohol. So there is more sulfites in a small can of tomato paste. So when we're making spaghetti and red sauce and stuff like that, lots more sulfites in that, more sulfites in a banana. I mean, it's a naturally occurring product or byproduct or component. I don't know if it's histamines. I do know some people can get headaches. I do like the rule of 1 glass of wine and 1 glass of water. From that ratio seems to pretty good. I mean, granted, 10 or 11 glasses of water in a sitting is a lot of water. But draw your own inference. The challenge is finding high quality wine. And I may be biased, is, when you're looking at mass produced wines that are getting treated with a lot of chemicals, getting treated with a lot of glyphosate and stuff like that, who knows what's giving you the headache? But when you're drinking wines that are farmed organically, where there's no pesticides and no chemicals and that sort of thing, I think you're certainly doing yourself a favor and getting as close as you can to mitigating the sulfites thing. I also think there's a psychosomatic thing where people will say, "You know what? I was sitting on a French sidewalk in Paris at a bistro and I drank all this wine. I never got any headache." It's like, yeah, you were in Paris. It's very hard to get a headache in Paris. So let's take that into consideration. But I think the sulfite thing, I would love to hear from the audience and see if they've got thoughts on sulfites. But I agree with you. I think it is naturally occurring and it's not necessarily the cause of the headache.
I will chime in with one more sulfite story. In my job at Redcar, a big part of what we make at Redcar is rosé of Pinot Noir. Now, rosé is not a wine that's designed to age for a long time, right? And by nature, it's higher in acidity. It has more acid to it. And there's one of these recent vintages where Tanner, our winemaker, came to me and he's like, "Oh, you won't believe it. I only had to do 1 SO2 addition on the entire lot of rosé. It came in at like 21 parts per million." He was so proud of how low the sulfites came in at. But that was really a circumstance of, the wine's not meant to age in the bottle more than a couple years.
Right.
And the wine has so much natural acidity to it that it's already sort of got a built-in preservative otherwise.
That's a good
That was
point.
the lowest sulfites I in my personal career.
So the wineries are adding sulfur to do what?
Um, well, for certain wines, it preserves color. You know,
Mm.
you're basically any SO2 you're adding is going to prevent oxygen from having an interaction and impact. And you know, oxidizing, that'll make the wine taste old a lot faster. With white wines, it'll make the color fail. You know, you'll have a bunch of color issues. And then you know, you want it to, you want to preserve what you've invested so much in, right? You don't want it to fall apart, to disintegrate, to, you know, to lose your whole effort in the bottle because you didn't give it enough protection, right? It's just like a basic food protector.
Right. Okay. And it's, I can see where it could become challenging with regards to how much and how frequent. And if you get too much, how do you blow that off? And if it's not enough, and it's just a constant titrating process.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's, I mean, those are all the little things that winemakers are actually investing a lot of time and energy into getting right in the winery, that, you know, we as the wine drinker don't think much about. We just hope they get it right.
Exactly. All right, let's go on to corks. Should you smell the cork? And if so, what are you smelling it for?
I've always been a big fan of smelling the cork. I've been told more recently that you smell the wine, right? That you're really not going to pick up everything you want from the cork. But I think there is a clue there, right? I think if you pull out that cork and give it a quick smell, if you're looking, you know, if you get that that sort of mildewy lawn, you know, I think of like moldy lawn clippings, like you left the cut grass in the lawnmower for a week and you get that sort of smell. You know, if you pull that off the cork, it's a pretty much guarantee the wine is gonna reflect that too.
Right.
So I'm a fan of smelling the cork. I've been informed recently that you should just smell the wine, but I don't know. I'd love to hear what the group thinks.
I would love to hear what the group thinks too. I am also a fan of smelling the cork, and basically you're inspecting everything to make certain that there's no spoilage. And so if you peel off the foil and you can see that it's damp and that there's some mold or fungus growing in there, chances are that's a telltale sign. Then if you smell a flaw, and TCA or cork taint is that flaw. Brady talked about it as damp grass. Those of us growing up in the Midwest know all about damp basements or wet dog, that type of stuff. So you know that damp, dank smell, and that's not going to be a great sign that the wine, something happened to the wine from a flawed standpoint. And Charisse also smells the cork to make sure it doesn't have anything weird on it, in it. Kay does not smell the cork. So we're all over the board on this one. So now I'm going to go to Google Earth to show some folks where this wine comes from. And Jeff, you're gonna hurt your rotator cuff doing that. I'm going to read while I do this, because I don't think people can appreciate Knights Valley and the history of Knights Valley. There was very few wineries there. I mean, Peter Michael was one of the first wineries there. Storybrooke Mountain was there. There's been some wineries that have come and gone. Unfortunately, some of them, oddly enough, were burned in the 1860s. So they're having fire problems back then. But I'm going to try to do three things at once, and that involves reading. So here is what we like to call home. For us, our playground is the Napa Sonoma wine region. So it is, I never get tired of saying this, it is arguably geologically one of the most diverse wine climates in the world. And it has in its borders of Napa and Sonoma County, hang on, let me get rid of these roads. In Napa and Sonoma County, you have a Mediterranean climate, of which only 3% of the globe has a Mediterranean climate. So, and not surprisingly, most of those are on the Mediterranean. But 3% allows for a very consistent time of year where you're going to get your moisture, get your rain, and then relatively mild temperatures throughout the rest of the year. Now, California has not had consistent rain in the last 3 years, and they are suffering from a very, very bad drought, which has immense long-term ramifications for the agricultural side of things, not to mention the human consumption of water. It also has 6 of the 12 known soil types in the world between these two regions. So you've got the geology, you've got the plate tectonics, you also have a volcanic region. So all of this within a very relatively small area from a square mile standpoint really makes it an unbelievable canvas with which to produce world-class fruit on. And in Knights Valley, I'll let you know that Knights Valley is one of the remote northeast corner of Sonoma County. It is dwarfed by Alexander Valley to the northwest. Mount St. Helena, which we will see in a second when I talk about the Great Western Mine, is right here. It actually is very prominent. You can see Mount St. Helena from just about everywhere in Sonoma, but when you are in Knights Valley, it is just towering above you. The beautiful valley and imposing mountain have always attracted settlers. The Wapo tribe arrived at least 4,000 years ago. Then they were followed by the Spanish and then Europeans. Despite its relatively youth and volcanic rock, Mount St. Helena is actually not a volcano. Geologists believe that a widespread system of fissures and vents laid down heavy layers of volcanic materials topped by St. Helena rhyolite, which is fantastic for wine. And it actually raised the mountain. Along with volcanic soil prized by wine growers, the volcanic vents distilled and deposited valuable elements that attracted miners, created hot springs, and that warmed the imaginations of entrepreneurs. So Brady mentioned that Calistoga is just 15 minutes away. So, you know, since the early 70s, Calistoga was always the spa geyser place where you got the mud baths and stuff like that. That has been going on for hundreds of years, which is interesting because the entrepreneurs actually put a toll road from the Great Western Mine over to Calistoga and would charge people to access Calistoga's tolls. So that was long before the state of Illinois came up with toll roads and the Illinois Tollway Authority. The other thing that's interesting is the town of Kellogg. And Knights Valley, by the way, is named after a gentleman whose last name was Knight. He bought the land from a land grant. He bought 7,000 acres. And then started selling off parcels to build the town. Kellogg was actually a town, had a hotel, had a general store, had a post office, all right here off of 128. And that was one of the ones that also got hurt by the fire. The Ida Clayton Toll Road was extended to the Great Western Mine, so you can actually see what the toll road looks like, because Ida Clayton comes up from 128 and goes all the way down into 29 for the Napa side. Now, interestingly, those of you that have been to Napa and Sonoma, if you start way south in downtown Napa and you go north to Calistoga, you will notice that there is a town roughly every 7 miles. And that is because in the early days in the 17 and 1800s, the only form of travel was by horse carriage and stagecoach. And they used to change the horses out every 7 miles to get a new fresh set of horses. So not surprisingly, a town would pop up where they would have the livery and where they would change the horses out. So when you think about it, you've got Napa, you've got Rutherford, you've got Yountville, you've got St. Helena, you've got Calistoga, and you have the same thing on the Sonoma side, all the way down from Sonoma, all the way up to Healdsburg, then Geyserville, then Cloverdale. They're all about 7 miles apart because that's exactly how long it would have for the horses to get fresh horses. Now, this is Moran Manor. So I'm looking here in Knights Valley, and this is Peter Michael over here. This is Knightsbridge Winery over here. This is Storybook Mountain over here. But if you remember that, what I showed you earlier, Brady's house that looks like this, I was able to snag from the archives of Sonoma Almanac this picture of the exact same view going down to 128. And here is the Moran Manor. So you have that from the and Brady, the history on this is fascinating. I don't know how much, I'm sure your family has dug into it, but
yeah, that's my favorite picture. I love that picture.
super cool. And this is Brady's aunt and uncle leaving after a tasting. But it is absolutely spectacular to see. And it hasn't really changed that much. Some of these buildings are gone through time. The hotel in Kellogg is gone. But Knights Valley has arguably some of the finest dirt, if you will, for wine production. And it's not surprising that you have a little postage stamp, less than 1 acre planted to some vines and some pretty fertile earth. So that is a nice little tribute to you and your parents. Jan, I would like to have some notes on your visit to Storybook. But Brady, tell me a little bit about kind of the case production on the Merlot on 2018 was how much?
We just did 35 cases of that wine that year. Yeah.
Do you ever just go 35 cases? We could sell everything at triple retail and it's not an ROI.
Yeah. So yeah, we think about that, but you know, the idea is we want the wine to be consumed, right? It's more fun to drink it than have it sit in a cellar forever. So we like it priced at a spot where people can drink it.
No, I love the price point on this. If this was across that county line that I just showed you, it would be 2x this minimum from that standpoint. So I love that. And 35 cases of this. You just got done with the 2022 harvest. What happened there, and what are some of the exciting things we should be looking for in the future?
Yeah, I mean, so we just picked everything the end of September, and you know, going through these 3 consecutive drought years, you know, yield has been a big concern. Last year, 2021, we only got about a ton of grapes from the entire vineyard. It was our lowest yield yet. So you know, I set out this last off season. I was like, you know what, we've just got to boost the yield. So I started with we cut hay from our own property. We you know, scattered hay through the vineyard. Then we covered it with chicken manure. So that was our first sort of round of fertilizer. We did a lot of cover crops.
Biodynamic. Let's go with the
biodynamic, right? We did a lot of cover crops. You know, beans and grasses. Really trying to replenish that nitrogen content in the soil. And then the big change we did this year on watering was, you know, each of the last few years at the end of summer, we're basically running out of water for irrigation. Our tank that we use for irrigation, which is fed by Yellow Jacket Creek up the road, it basically just isn't filling.
Anecdotally, Yellow Jacket was also the name of the other mine in town.
Oh, it's got to be named for that. Yeah.
Yep.
So anyway, this year I was like, well, you know what? We're going to water when we have water. So we actually irrigated much earlier than normal. But the idea was, well, we're going to give the grapes water when we know we've got it. So when we hit this really hot heat spell, you know, at the beginning of September, where it got up to like 115 degrees here, way hotter than grapevines prefer it. You know, we were in a good spot. We actually had a lot of canopy. The vines that were shielded came out fine. So we just had basically twice our yield this year from last year. We got about 2 tons this year, which on less than an acre is a great yield. And 2 tons equals, you know, more than 100 cases. So we're looking at you know, our biggest crop in a few years. I'm really pleased about it.
And when would that hit the market?
2022 wine should hit in you know, we'll have it bottled by 2024.
Okay.
And, you know, maybe released. If it's not released end of 2024, then early 2025.
I like it. I like it. And when we were there this summer, there was a plot of land back here on the property that looked pretty darn nice. Undeveloped 4 acres section of land. What's the status with that, and how can I get you to farm it?
Yeah, I'm still actually, I've been doing research on the best ways to plant and train grapes in a drought. But at this point, We're still getting the most out of our little section, but yeah, you can see this section on the map there.
Yeah. This is just screaming, plant me, plant me, plant me.
It is. It is. So yeah, I'd love to, even if I took on just a section of that field to start,
right,
it would really, I mean, boy, 4 acres of grapes could yield, a lot more in terms of weight and volume. So it'll be interesting to see if we can get that going. I did read recently that they said a single high wire is actually the most efficient way to train and trellis grapevines in a drought, which is actually good news, because that's one of the simplest training systems there is.
Other than Old Vine Zinfandel, where you just let them do whatever they want.
Yeah, actually, in that old photo you were showing, that old graphic of the property, it looks like there's grapevines off in the distance. And yeah, those are, if you look, like out there, I think those are grapevines, and those are all trained in like the old head trained Zinfandel fashion.
Super cool. Yeah, it was. I love discovering this photo. So I'm glad you've seen it before, because the house is amazing from the standpoint of the architecture, who built it. It's if I'm not mistaken, it's a National Registry of Historic Home type of thing.
It is. Yeah.
Super cool. I hope you do get to planning that. 3 more myths. Ready? Certain varietals should be grown in certain areas.
That can be true. I mean, some grape varietals are more flexible than others.
I think that's generally true. I would agree with that one.
Yeah.
Old wine is good wine.
That can definitely be false.
Mayomi is good. Okay, who stuck that in there? No, we won't say that. Last one, a deeper punt. And for everyone, the punt is at the bottom of the bottle, where usually it's much bigger on champagne bottles. But a deeper punt means a wine of higher quality.
It does not. I was telling that story that way back in the day when I was working at Clos de Vol, they had their 1972 cab was in that original Judgment of Paris, and it's aged for I tried it 40 years later, is still an excellent wine. And that 1972 cab, that bottle had no punt at all on it. It was just a flat bottom to that bottle.
and that, I believe, was the inspiration for the song. I'm not going to sing it, so don't make me discuss flat bottom bottles. Thank you. Come on, Nelson. That was out of nowhere. All right, Brady, you have been an absolute trooper. Adolfo is now wondering what he has agreed to, because he will be our guest next week. Find the SIP episodes that are going to be, I believe Mission Control has put them on the chat. This was SIP episode 109. Next week, we're going to discuss with Adolfo. This is an awesome story. And Brady, I hope you stick around for it next week and learn. I mean, he does a barrel fermentation Cabernet Sauvignon that is, to call it a labor of love is an understatement for sure. But it's an interesting story about where Adolfo first learned how to make wine. It wasn't in this country, and what he's done with the opportunity that he's been given, and the Cabernet speaks for itself. We are going to meet him of Monroy Wines, and I want everyone to, again, take a bow for your ability to buy wine and help us change the world and impact children's lives and impact military veterans and a whole bunch of other charities like World Central Kitchen and Chef Jose Andres, because we get to do these things because you like limited production wines and supporting small businesses and small wineries. So my hat's off to all of you. Brady, thank you so much for spending your Friday night with us. Cheers, everyone. Be good to one another. Thanks so much. See you next week.